The wagon wheels groaned like dying things as it rolled through the dust, iron biting against rock, the sun bleeding red across the horizon. The woman on the back didn't cry anymore. Her wrists were raw from the rope, her eyes hollow from the long road. The men riding alongside didn't look at her, just spat tobacco and muttered. "Baron," they said, one drawled, his voice dry as the desert wind. "Ain't worth the feed she eats." The woman's name was Eleanor Hayes, though no one had spoken it in days. The town of Dry Creek rose ahead, a scatter of wooden bones and creaking signs, the smell of smoke and horse sweat thick in the air. When the wagon stopped before a weathered gate marked Turner Ranch, the man in the driver's seat jerked his thumb toward the corral. "That's our new home," he said. "Paid in full." A tall figure waited there, broad-shouldered, coat faded from the sun, hat shadowing his face. Caleb Turner. He said nothing when they cut the rope from Ellie's wrists. He only watched, still as a fence post, while the men climbed back onto the wagon. The driver smirked as he turned the reins. "You'll see, Mr. Turner. She won't be no good for nothing." The wagon rattled away. Silence took its place. Only the wind whispered through dry grass. Ellie lifted her chin, her lips cracked but steady. Caleb studied her, eyes the color of a storm waiting to break. Then, without a word, he turned and walked toward the barn. "Come on," he said over his shoulder. "You'll earn your keep." The ranch stretched far and lonely, miles of brittle fence line and dying brush. Cattle no one had tended in months. Ellie followed, her dress torn, her boots sinking in the dust. Inside the barn, the smell of hay and old leather hit her. Caleb handed her a pitchfork. "Stalls need cleaning," he said. His voice was deep, quiet, the kind of voice that came from a man who didn't talk unless it mattered. She nodded, took the fork, and went to work. Through the slats, the light fell in thin golden lines across the dirt. Each breath was grit. Sweat stung her eyes. She didn't stop. Caleb leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her like a man watching a ghost move. By nightfall, the barn stood clean for the first time in years. Ellie wiped her face with her sleeve. Her hands trembled, but her back stayed straight. Caleb stepped forward, offering a tin cup of water. She hesitated, then took it. Their fingers brushed. "Eats in the house," he said. She followed him into a cabin built from time and silence. The floorboards creaked beneath her boots. One chair, one table, a single plate. He ladled stew into 2 bowls, then sat across from her. For a while, only the spoon's scrape and the ticking of an oil lamp filled the air. Finally, he said, "You worked hard." Ellie didn't answer. He looked up. "Most folks wouldn't. Most folks never had to," she murmured. Something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been respect. Outside, the wind moaned against the shutters. Somewhere distant, a coyote howled. Later, under the fading lamplight, Caleb spoke again, voice low. "You got anyone coming for you?" Ellie shook her head. "No one ever does." He nodded once, as if that made sense. Then he stood, took his hat, and paused at the door. "Starting tomorrow, you'll help with the herd," he said. "Sun up." And then he was gone. That night, Ellie lay on a cot in a small corner room. The stars burned through the window, cold, far away. She could still hear her family's words in the dark. "She's barren. She's broken. She's no good to anyone." Her hand curled into the blanket. Somewhere outside, Caleb's boots crossed the porch. The boards creaked, then stopped. A match flared. Through the thin walls, the smell of smoke drifted in. She closed her eyes, and the sound of the desert wind swallowed the rest. Morning came pale and sharp. The sun climbed like fire over the ridge. Ellie stood in the corral, her skirts tied up, hair loose in the wind. Caleb waited beside a restless stallion, white as bone, eyes wild. "Ghost wind," he said. "Ain't been ridden since my boy died." She met the horse's gaze. "He don't look mean." Caleb gave a humorless laugh. "He's mean enough." Ellie took a slow step forward. The horse snorted, pawed the dust. Another step. Her voice was steady when she spoke, soft, calm. "Easy now. I know what it's like to be called trouble." Caleb's eyes narrowed. He said nothing. Ghostwind's ears flicked. The animal stilled. Ellie reached out, let her fingers brush its muzzle. Dust swirled around them like smoke. For the first time in years, the horse didn't rear. Caleb's jaw tightened. "You've done this before." Ellie didn't look at him. "My pa trained horses. Before he sold me to a man who thought he could fix me." She turned, eyes burning through the morning glare. "Turns out, I ain't the one who needed fixing." Caleb looked at her then, not like she was a burden, not like she was broken, like he was seeing something the world had missed. The silence stretched long. Then he said, quiet as thunder, "They said you're useless, but I reckon they've never seen gold shine in dirt before." Ellie didn't move, didn't breathe. Only the wind answered, carrying the words out across the wide, waiting land. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the hills, the two of them stood at the fence line, her hands calloused and raw, his face caught between shadow and light. The desert had taken so much from both of them, but in that moment, beneath the burning sky, it felt like it might give something back. And far off, where the wind met the dust, Dry Creek whispered the start of a legend it didn't yet know it was telling. The storm rolled in without warning, black clouds clawing at the sky, wind howling through the canyon like a lost soul. Ellie held the reins tight, her hair whipping across her face, the cattle panicking in a rush of hooves and thunder. "Get him turned, Ellie," Caleb shouted over the wind. His voice cut through the roar, steady, commanding. Lightning cracked. The herd broke, left toward the ravine. Ellie kicked her horse hard, mud flying beneath its hooves. She swung wide, hollering, waving her hat, pushing the cattle back with nothing but grit and stubbornness. When it was done, when the last steer stumbled back to the plain, rain began to fall. Heavy, cold, relentless. Ellie dismounted, her hands trembling from exhaustion. Caleb rode up beside her, water dripping from the brim of his hat. His shirt clung to his shoulders, blood dark on one sleeve where a horn had grazed him. "You're hurt," she said. He looked at the wound, then at her. "You're wetter in a drowned pup. Let's get inside." They rode back in silence, the storm chasing them all the way to the ranch. Inside the barn, the air was thick with the scent of rain and horses. Caleb stripped off his coat and winced. "Let me see," Ellie said. He hesitated. She didn't. She stepped close, peeled the torn fabric back, and saw the cut, deep, angry, but clean. Without a word, she fetched water and a strip of cloth from the tack room. As she cleaned the wound, he barely flinched. "You don't talk much," she said finally. He met her eyes. "Talk's cheap. Never mended nothing for me." The rain hammered the roof like 1,000 small fists. Ellie tied the cloth tight, her fingers brushing his skin. "There," she said. "You'll live." He gave a small, rough smile. "Reckon I've been doing that outta habit." Days passed. The storm broke, leaving the earth soft and the sky clean. Ellie worked the ranch from dawn till dusk, mending fences, hauling water, feeding cattle. Caleb moved with quiet precision, always near but never in her way. Sometimes, in the still heat of afternoon, she'd catch him watching her. Not like a man watches a woman, but like a man studying a puzzle he can't solve. One evening, she found him sitting on the porch, a knife in his hand and a block of cedar on his knee. He was carving. "What's that?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Used to be a horse," he said, trying to make it one again. She stepped closer. "You're good." He shrugged. "Made one for my boy. Never finished it." The words hung there, heavy as thunder. Ellie said nothing, only lowered herself to the step beside him. The knife rasped softly against wood. After a long while, she spoke. "How old was he?" "6. And your wife?" He paused. They were riding into town. Stagecoach never made it. The sound of the blade stopped. Only the wind moved then, whispering through the dry grass. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. He set the carving down, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Ain't nothing left to be sorry for. I buried him on the ridge. Thought if I worked hard enough, the ache might stay buried with him." "Did it?" He turned to her. "No." That night, as darkness swallowed the land, Ellie couldn't sleep. The silence pressed in on her, thick and alive. She rose, went outside. The stars burned fierce above the plains. Across the yard, the barn door stood open, lantern light spilling out. She walked toward it. Inside, Caleb was there, sitting on an overturned crate, holding the wooden horse. He didn't notice her at first. His head was bowed, the lantern glow catching in his beard. He spoke low like to himself. Should have been there. Should have kept them close. Ellie stayed in the shadows. Her voice was soft. You can't fight what's already gone. He looked up, eyes tired but sharp. You talk like you know loss. I do. He studied her for a moment. Family. She nodded once. Sold me off when I couldn't give them what they wanted. He didn't ask what that was. He didn't need to. After a long pause, he said, This land don't care who we were, Ellie. Only what we choose to be tomorrow. The words lingered, heavy with truth. She stepped forward into the light. Then tomorrow, I'll work harder. His mouth twitched, the ghost of a smile. Reckon you already do. The next morning, the sky blazed clear. The desert stretched endless and alive. Ellie saddled Ghost Wind, the stallion now gentled by her touch. Caleb leaned on the fence, arms folded, watching. He trusts you, Caleb said. She smiled faintly. Maybe he sees we're both stubborn. A dust trail rose on the far ridge. Riders 3, maybe 4. Caleb's face hardened. You know them? She asked. He didn't answer right away. Not yet, but I will. The riders disappeared behind a rise, leaving a sense of unease that stuck like burrs. That night, Caleb cleaned his old rifle. The metal gleamed in the firelight, cold and familiar. Ellie said nothing, but the question burned in her eyes. He caught her look. Don't worry, just old ghosts. But as the fire cracked and the coyotes called, the silence between them told a different story, of something coming down the trail, something that wouldn't pass quiet. Caleb set the rifle aside, his jaw tight. Get some rest, he said. Ellie nodded, but sleep didn't find her. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the sound of his words echoing through her chest. Old ghosts don't ride alone. At dawn, Caleb was already outside, saddling his horse. The sky was bruised with red. Ellie stepped onto the porch, hair tangled by the wind. You expecting trouble? He looked at her, eyes cold and steady. Always. And with that, he rode toward the ridge, into the rising sun, into whatever waited beyond it. Ellie stood watching until he vanished into the glare. Then she turned back to the ranch, the air thick with the promise of storm not made of weather. The first gunshot shattered the night. Ellie dropped the lantern where she stood, the flame flaring and dying in the dirt. The ranch dogs barked wild, chains rattling. Another shot cracked through the dark, closer this time, echoing off the barn walls like thunder. She ran to the porch, barefoot, heart pounding against her ribs. Moonlight spilled silver over the yard. For riders came through the dust, faces hidden under bandanas, coats flapping like black wings. Turner, one shouted, voice cruel and grinning. Come on out, old man. Time to settle debts. Caleb burst from the barn, rifle in hand. His shout cut through the wind. You boys picked the wrong night. Gunfire answered. Wood splintered from the porch post beside Ellie's head. She dove behind a water trough, mud soaking her dress. The horses screamed, the cattle bellowed. The air filled with smoke, gunpowder, chaos. Ellie, Caleb called from the barn door. Stay down. She crawled through the mud, grabbed a fallen pistol from the ground. Caleb's spare. Her fingers wrapped around the grip like they'd never forgotten. 3 shadows dismounted, spreading out. The 4th stayed mounted, watching. Ellie caught the glint of a silver badge pinned to his chest, defaced, scratched through. The mark of the Black Coyote Gang. The same men who'd murdered Caleb's family. A bullet tore through the barn window. Caleb fired back, the blast lighting his face for an instant, jaw set, eyes cold. Another round whined past. He staggered, clutching his shoulder. Caleb, Ellie cried, starting forward. Stay back, he snarled through his teeth. He dropped behind the feed barrels, bleeding, reloading with shaking hands. One of the coyotes laughed, a sound like a knife scraping bone. Can't hide forever, Turner. We remember you. You hung my brother. Caleb spat blood, chambered another round. Then you remember why he swung. Gunfire answered. Ellie pressed herself against the trough, her mind racing. Caleb couldn't hold them off. There were too many. Her eyes flicked toward the loft, the old rifle hanging on its hooks above the stalls. Her father's voice whispered from some deep, buried place. Steady hands, Ellie. The shot don't come from your arms. It comes from your heart. She rose, slow as dawn, and ran for the barn. Bullets kicked up dirt around her feet. She dove through the open door, rolled, grabbed a rifle from the rafters. It was heavy, familiar. Caleb stared, half in disbelief. You know how to use that? She pulled the lever, checking the chamber. I was born knowing. He managed a faint, bloodied smile. Then end this. She climbed to the loft, crawling on her belly through hay, dust, and shadow. Through a crack in the boards, she saw them moving below. The coyotes circling the barn like wolves. The leader dismounted, tall and lean, his coat brushing the dirt. A jagged scar cut across his cheek. Come on, Turner. We ain't gonna ask again. Ellie took aim. The rifle's barrel steadied against the beam. Breathe. One shot. The leader's hat flew from his head, the bullet grazing his temple. He spun, cursing, firing blindly into the dark. Up there, one of them yelled. She shifted position before the return fire hit, splinters raining down around her. Caleb, from below, opened up, covering her with 3 quick shots. The fight turned into a storm. Smoke filled the barn, the smell of powder thick in the air. Ellie moved like she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. Calm, deliberate. Each shot found its mark. One man dropped beside the fence. Another screamed and fell from his saddle. The leader ducked behind a trough, firing wildly. Come out, woman, he shouted. I'll make it quick. Ellie's voice came cold and steady through the smoke. You took his family. You took my worth. Let's see what you could take now. She fired. The bullet caught him square in the chest. He stumbled, fell to his knees, the gun slipping from his hand. Silence fell. The rain began again, soft, steady, washing blood into the dirt. Ellie climbed down from the loft. Her hands shook now that it was over. Caleb leaned against the stall door, face pale, blood soaking his sleeve. You did it, he rasped. She nodded, barely breathing. They won't hurt you again. He managed a faint smile, the kind that carried years of sorrow and something new beneath it, pride. They'll talk about this, he said. Let him talk. She helped him outside. The dawn was just breaking, thin light spilling over the hills. The land looked quiet again, almost peaceful. The bodies lay still where they'd fallen. The coyotes that had haunted this place were gone. Caleb sank onto the porch step, breathing heavy. You shouldn't have had to fight. She looked out at the horizon. Already been fighting my whole life. Tonight just had a name. He chuckled weakly. Remind me never to cross you, Ellie Hayes. She turned to him, eyes fierce but soft. You won't. As the sun climbed higher, the old barn cast long shadows over the dead. The desert was silent, save for the wind carrying dust through the valley. Ellie knelt beside the rifle, wiping the barrel clean with a rag. Her reflection flashed in the steel, strong, unbroken, alive. Caleb's voice came from behind her, faint but steady. You saved my life. She didn't look up. You gave me one worth saving. Later, when the townsfolk came, they found the ranch quiet and the story already alive in whispers. They say a woman alone drove off the black coyotes, the blacksmith told the preacher, killed their leader herself. And somewhere beyond Dry Creek, under the wide western sky, the wind carried a new name through the sage and dust. Ellie of the Golden Eyes, a woman no one wanted, who stood when the desert called for blood. The shovel hit hard earth with a dull thud. Ellie drove it deeper, the morning sun hot on her neck, the smell of gunpowder still clinging to the air. The ground was dry, stubborn, like the men she was burying. Behind her, Caleb leaned against the fence post, arm bound, face pale but steady. He hadn't said a word since dawn. The wind moved through the prairie grass, whispering like a ghost choir. Ellie dropped the shovel, brushed the dust from her hands, and stood staring at the 4 shallow mounds. No words, no prayers, just the truth carved in silence. She turned. They're done. Caleb nodded slowly. Let the land have him. It remembers better than folks do. She wiped the sweat from her brow and looked toward the horizon. The sky stretched wide and blinding, endless as her exhaustion. What happens now? He looked past her, toward the ranch house, toward the life that was somehow still standing. Now we live. By midday, the town had come. A few riders from Dry Creek, faces curious, cautious, all pretending they weren't staring. The sheriff dismounted first, hat in hand. "Miss Hayes," he said, voice careful. "Folks are talking. They say you stood your ground against the coyotes yourself." Ellie didn't answer. She just wiped her hands on her skirt, eyes flat as the desert. The sheriff cleared his throat. "You got no reason to worry. Town's grateful. You saved this place, and him." He glanced at Caleb. "Reckon you earned more than most men ever did." Ellie met his gaze. "I didn't do it for thanks." He tipped his hat. "Then you're better than most." When they left, the dust hung in the air long after. Caleb walked out to where she stood. "They'll make you a legend before the week's done." She shook her head. "Let 'em tell how they want. I ain't no legend." He smiled faintly. "That's what all the legends say." That evening, the light turned gold across the valley. The ranch was quiet again, just the creak of the windmill, the low hum of the earth cooling after a long day. Caleb sat on the porch, whittling the little wooden horse he'd been carving for years. The cuts were clean now, confident. The shape had finally come together. Ellie stepped up beside him, wiping her hands on a rag. "You finish it?" He nodded, held out to her. "For you." She blinked. "That was for your boy." He looked at her then, really looked at the dust on her skin, the fire still burning behind her eyes. "He's gone. But this ranch ain't. And neither am I." She took the carving, holding it like something fragile. "Why me?" His voice was quiet, deep, the way the land sounds before a storm. "Because you stayed. Because you fought when no one else would. Because they said you were useless, and they were blind as fools." He reached out, his hand rough and warm around hers. "To me, you're worth more than gold." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. The wind stilled, as if listening. Ellie didn't speak. She just looked out toward the dying sun, the sky bleeding orange and fire. Sometimes the world didn't need promises. Sometimes it only needed someone who saw you as you were, and stayed. Night came soft and wide. A lantern burned low in the window, casting gold light over the porch. Caleb dozed in the chair, the lines of his face eased by piece for the first time in years. Ellie sat on the steps, the wooden horse resting in her palm. The desert stretched before her, vast and silent. From far off, a coyote called, but it was no threat now, just sound and memory. She looked toward the graves on the hill. The moonlight brushed them silver. In that moment, she understood she'd buried more than men. She'd buried the name they'd chained her with. Useless, barren, nothing, all of it gone, swallowed by the dust. She rose slow, steady, strong. Behind her, Caleb stirred, opening one eye. "Can't sleep." "Don't need to," she said softly. "Not tonight." He smiled, half asleep. "You got that look again." "What look?" "The one that says you're thinking too loud." She laughed quietly. It sounded strange to her, new, untested. "Maybe I'm just listening." "To what?" She glanced toward the horizon, where the wind ran wild through the grass. "To the land. To the quiet. To something I never thought I'd hear." "What's that?" "Peace." He didn't answer, just leaned back, eyes closing again. "Ain't a bad sound." The dawn found them like that. The ranch bathed in pale light, the desert stretching endless and golden. Ellie stood in the corral, ghost wind beside her, his breath fogging in the chill air. She brushed his mane, whispering, "We made it, boy." From the porch, Caleb watched her, a faint smile on his face. The old storyteller's voice drifts in then, slow and rough as whiskey. They say the woman no one wanted became the heart of Dry Creek, that the desert, cruel as it was, softened where she walked. They called her Ellie of the Golden Eyes, the one who turned shame into fire. The voice fades beneath the wind, leaving only the creak of saddle leather, the soft thump of hooves, and the sound of a life no longer haunted. As the sun climbed higher, Ellie turned toward the light. The land gleamed before her, endless, open, waiting. And for the first time, she didn't feel small against it.